Good morning, it's Wednesday the 8th of November here in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Saudi Arabia's investment minister tells us the normalisation of diplomatic ties with Israel is still possible.
More than a quarter of FTSE 100 chief financial officers have left their jobs so far this year.
Plus, we have a special report on how Nestlé's factories in Ukraine are adapting to air raids and power cuts.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The French bank Crédit Agricole posting third quarter results that beat analyst estimates. Third quarter net income came in at €1.75 billion. Revenues rose by 19%. Net income rose by 33%, both ahead of estimates. The increase is driven by income from lending in Italy and a 26% jump in fixed income trading during a quarter where other European banks saw steep declines.
Now to our top stories. Saudi Arabia's Minister of Investment says that talks toward a normalisation of ties with Israel remain on the table, despite the kingdom's criticism of Israeli military action in Gaza. Speaking exclusively to Bloomberg at the New Economy Forum in Singapore, Khalid Al-Falih said that there is a need for closer ties across the Middle East.
You know, when those discussions were taking place, and His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was clear that it is contingent on a pathway to peaceful resolution of the Palestinian questions. That was on the table, it remains on the table. And obviously the setback over the last month has clarified why was Saudi Arabia so adamant that resolution of the Palestinian conflict has to be part of a broader normalization in the Middle East.
Saudi Arabia's Khalid Al-Falih speaking. The comments come after efforts to build a relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel were thrown into doubt by the ongoing war in Gaza.
Israel has confirmed that its troops are fighting inside Gaza City as they close in on its centre. The news comes as the Biden administration says they're in discussions with Israel about respecting humanitarian law and keeping airstrikes in the Palestinian territory proportional. The Hamas-run health ministry says that more than 10,300 people have now been killed in Gaza since the war began, including at least 4,000 children. In an interview, Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, was asked to respond to the scale of the Palestinian casualties.
Every civilian who is killed in Gaza is a tragedy, and they are the unintended consequence of legitimate warfare. It happens in every war, particularly in a war where we're dealing with an enemy that uses their own civilians as human shields.
Ron Dermer's comments come a month after the Hamas attack on Israel that killed 1,400 people.
Now, China's Vice President Han Zheng has talked up improving ties with the United States at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum in Singapore. It comes as the US President is expected to meet the Chinese leader Xi Jinping for talks next week in San Francisco. Han praised recent meetings between the two countries.
More recently, as agreed by the two sides, China and the United States have had more important high-level interactions. These interactions have sent out positive signals and raised the expectations of the international community on the improvement of China-US relations.
China's vice president speaking through a translator. He warned against protectionism in the world, emphasising that China remains committed to opening up its economy. And while Han described China's economy as recovering, he said the global recovery lacks momentum.
BlackRock says a mountain of cash waiting on the sidelines is a major issue facing global investors. Speaking at the Global Financial Leaders Investment Summit in Hong Kong, the firm's head of its global client business, Mark Wiedman, said, quote, there's about $4 trillion of cash that is sloshing around waiting for action, adding that he has no idea when it will be reinvested. The comments come as the money market funds saw their assets hit a fresh record earlier this year, with interest rates north of 5%. Luring investors away from riskier bets.
FTSE 100 finance chiefs are leaving their jobs at the highest rate in 5 years. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo reports now.
A tough economy and regulatory requirements means many chief financial officers are reassessing their positions. More than a quarter have already left this year, double the same period in 2022. According to research by Russell Reynolds, depressed bonuses and the allure of private equity are amongst the main reasons for leaving. The recruiter said that long-term incentives for CFOs were hit during the pandemic, and their failure to recover has played a role in encouraging retirement. Earlier this year, London Stock Exchange chief Julia Hoggett called for constructive discussion on UK exec pay, warning it's often well below global benchmarks. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
The International Monetary Fund says high interest rates are unlikely to lead Europe's economy to crash. In a new report, the IMF forecasts the region will achieve a soft landing, with growth slowing to 1.3% this year before picking up slightly in 2024. However, the International Financial Institution does say that getting inflation back to target in the euro area could take many years, adding that the cost of easing monetary policy too early would be, quote, substantial.
Now, Britain faces a decade in the doldrums, according to the National Institute of Social and Economic Research. The think tank says that unless the government steps up public investment, the UK will continue to see poor growth and worsening regional inequalities. NISA warned against cutting taxes before the next election. It comes after King Charles's speech at the ceremonial state opening of Parliament on Tuesday, which set out an election-focused legislative agenda. Sunak's government announced tougher sentences for criminals, limited housing reforms and more drilling for North Sea oil and gas, which the Prime Minister explained here.
We'll be bringing forward legislation that supports our North Sea oil and gas industry, supporting the 200,000 jobs in that sector, but also reducing our reliance on foreign imported energy. That's the right thing to do.
Sunak's party faces a 20-point poll deficit against the main opposition Labour Party, who described the Tory offer as, quote, gimmicks, division and more of the same. Now, Christmas is coming, Stephen, but that for some, for many maybe in the UK, means more debt. Cash-strapped Britons are expected to turn to buy now, pay later deals. I've been reading up on the latest forecast for BNPL, which the regulators have been quite worried about. Adobe Digital Insights says that apparently these BNPL loans could increase by almost 9% to a record £3.7 billion. I thought that was a very striking figure.
Yeah, well, this is, of course, we're still waiting for the regulatory promise of how the sector is going to be managed to come through. Of course, the regulation appears to have stalled. No update since February on the Treasury paper that's meant to give the Financial Conduct Authority powers to oversee the companies that offer these kind of loans. The FCA has stepped in some specific case to try and protect consumers, but it's an area, because the interest rates can be very high, it can put people in a situation where it makes it very difficult for them to repay these loans. And the idea that, you know, there's a call for more oversight of how these loans are handed out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the stories that we've been looking at here, certainly focused on the UK. But let's return now to, well, obviously the top story that we've been covering for the last month and the latest today on the Middle East. Israel says that its troops are continuing to fight inside Gaza City now. This is Saudi Arabia's investment minister, you heard it just a moment ago, Khalid al-Fali, saying that talks on normalising ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel are actually still on the table, but they hinge on the Palestinian question. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Turkey Bureau Chief Onur Ant. Good morning, Onur. Al-Fali's statement about ties with Israel does seem quite significant. He was asked about whether oil would be used as a way of achieving a ceasefire in the fighting between Israel and Hamas. How important was al-Fali's statement?
I think both of his comments were quite important. This was the first time a top Saudi official on the record in public talked about the possibility of continuing normalization talks with Israel, which have all obviously been disrupted by what happened a month ago in the ensuing war. But it's clear that Saudi Arabia still takes this possibility seriously, but it's also important to note that their position, pre-war position, has not changed. And if anything, what happened over the past month seems to have reinforced their perception that without a sustainable solution, whatever that may be and however difficult it might look, especially right now. Without such a solution, there's no point in trying to pursue a normalization with Israel, because sooner or later, developments in the region, such as the one that we've seen over the past month, is going to poison the environment, is going to make that kind of normalization unfeasible. That's been the Saudi stance since early on, but this is the first time a top Saudi official, as you said, has come up publicly and said, yes, possibly there's still on the possibility of the normalization still on the table, but here are the conditions. Now, the second part of your question, that's also significant, because again, no one really over the last month thought this was a repeat of 1973. For those who are unfamiliar with the history of oil boycotts, that's the last time, as far as I can remember, that there was a sort of wide-ranging boycott by oil producers, where producers used their production to effect certain political changes. It's obvious from Khalid al-Falih's response yesterday in Singapore that that is not an option, that is not a possibility that anyone seriously entertaining at the moment. But it is important that it came from someone like Khalid al-Falih. Not only he's an investment minister, but again, he's actually the former head of Saudi Aramco, really knowledgeable and familiar with Saudi Arabian oil policy and how it can or should be used in foreign affairs, if at all. So it's very important that this came from him.
At the same time, on the ground in Gaza, Honor, Israel saying that its troops have entered the centre of Gaza City. Of course, the humanitarian situation there is still very, very difficult.
True. Humanitarian situation in Gaza is difficult, and it's worsening every day simply because still there is no mechanism in place that allows more significant amounts of humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza. The UN's own estimate, as recently as last week, was that a fraction of what Gaza needs is now going through every day from Egypt into Gaza Strip through the Rafah crossing. Has there been an increase in recent days? Yes, it certainly has been. We can see that from the number of trucks going in every day. But is it enough to meet the needs of more than 2 million people who are still in Gaza City, who don't have any access to meaningful amounts of water or power or food? It's certainly not, and it's a consensus. It's a consensus opinion held by many NGOs, including the UN's own humanitarian arm operating in the Gaza City, as far as we know.
Okay. Honor, thank you so much for being with us this morning. That is Bloomberg's Turkey Bureau Chief Honor Ant giving us the latest details when it comes to the Middle East.
Of course, as the war between Israel and Hamas has taken the focus off Ukraine, but fighting rages on there too. Russian drones and missiles have targeted Ukrainian infrastructure in recent days. But multinationals like Nestle are continuing to produce everyday staples such as chocolate wafers and mayonnaise there. Our consumer goods reporter Dasha Afanasieva has been to Western Ukraine to see firsthand how its sites there have found a new rhythm, and she joins us now. Dasha, good morning to you. How has Nestle adapted in Ukraine to keep operating?
Good morning. So they've built bomb shelters, and they've got a whole system for what happens when workers go down to a bomb shelter, which is sometimes for 2 or 3 hours, because depending on where you are on the production line, your products are potentially going to have to get thrown out. Others are going to have to get recycled into the produce. Others are okay to use, and really the priority has been the safety of staff, and they've got one factory that's within artillery range essentially of the Russian border, so they've built these shelters that are overground that you can get to within 10 seconds. It's quicker than air raids.
Look, that reality is staggering, isn't it? I mean, in terms of the challenges, such enormous challenges, what did you think was the most difficult thing about trying to do business in that sort of environment?
I think it sounded like, and what people said repeatedly, was that it's the whole challenge of dealing with when colleagues lose someone, when someone has to go to war, when someone's injured, going down into the bomb shelter and worrying, where is your family? You're safe. And I think Nestle's had to do that step up that psychosocial support that in varying degrees all big corporates have to a whole different level. I interviewed a woman who'd lost her husband, and she was at the same time a manager, so she went back to work quite quickly and actually found solace in that.
Nestle, at the same time, has this business that's expanding in Ukraine, but also has a business in Russia. How does it balance those two?
It's a bit awkward, I think, because in Russia the business is larger. It's got 6 factories in Russia, 7,000 workers, and it's been under pressure to leave because the argument's sort of, why are you, on the one hand, supporting Ukraine, it's all victory for Ukraine, but on the other hand, Russians who potentially supported this invasion get to eat, Maggi stock cubes, etc. But it's also very, very difficult to leave. As we saw with Danone and Carlsberg, they were going to exit, but they had their assets seized. So Nestle and other multinationals continue paying taxes in the country. There's not necessarily a better option.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.